Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the Messy Time studio in a beautiful, beautiful early summer day in Florida, 9th of May, 2022. I am joined today, very happily, by a colleague based in Cape Town. Nick Hudson is the chairman of Panda, which is an acronym for Pandemics, Data, and Analytics. And we're delighted to have him here to talk about all things pandemic hysteria related and anything else that's on his mind. So Nick, thanks so much for joining the show.
Could be a long show if you're going to talk about all the things that are on my mind.
Excellent. That's good. It's so long as we can keep everyone engaged and enlightened, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So welcome aboard. What's top of your mind today? That sounds like a long list. Maybe you give us a little background on Panda itself and how it came to be.
Yeah, sure. I'll get that out the way first. So Panda emerged very early in the epidemic, in the early months of the whole story. And really, the genesis of it was that I and a few friends, colleagues from my network were all beginning to see the same thing, which was that there was a massive divergence between the media and public health institution hysteria and the actual facts on the ground about COVID, this name that they kind of invented and rather obtusely slapped onto the virus that should have been called SARS, or rather the disease that should have been called SARS.
Right.
And these friends and I kind of started becoming increasingly concerned about the lunatic responses that were being proposed. In China, you can sort of say, well, they're crackpot dictators, you kind of understand when they do something crazy, right? But then if the Italians following suit and the lockdowns rolling out. And in South Africa, South Africa is a developing country. And the idea that you would lock down a country that doesn't have a welfare net, a safety net, seemed to us to be frankly absurd, especially seeing that all the standing guidelines completely ruled lockdown out. Quarantining of the healthy was, universally viewed as a stupid public health policy prior to COVID.
Yep.
And we became even more concerned when South Africa announced in our case, it was 3 weeks to flatten the curve, because things move a little slower in the Southern Hemisphere. 2 weeks wasn't good enough. And of course, that 3 weeks came and went, and the thing carried on for another 2 years. We've only just finished our state of disaster a couple of days ago. And they are, of course, trying to launch all of the pseudo-scientific nonsense of cloth masks and all of that into permanent trajectory in this country. That's how bananas these people actually are. But we decided, took a look at the landscape around us, noted that because of this hysteria, there was widespread popular support for the lockdown concept, and we wanted to take it on. We thought that the best way to do that would be to point out that no cost-benefit analysis had been performed, make a fairly innocuous point. So we wrote a paper. By training, I'm an actuary. I've never worked as an actuary for a day in my life, but I have a fairly good network in the actuarial profession. And actuaries are very good at converting public health stories into their economic consequences and vice versa. That's kind of second nature stuff to actuaries. And with a group of these guys, I kind of knocked out a paper called Quantifying the Years of Life Lost to Lockdown, because we felt that what was being lost in the debate was that the lockdowns would have economic effects, which would have public health effects all of their own. Right. And we demonstrated with, I think the paper was extensively reviewed by people all over the world because it was the first of its kind. We demonstrated pretty convincingly that the public health consequences of the lockdown would way exceed any public health consequences of the disease, let alone, the marginal impact of not flattening the curve or slowing the spread, which is obviously smaller than the impact of the disease. So we came up with the estimate that the years of life lost to lockdown would exceed the years of life lost to the disease by a factor of 30. And we put that paper out, stuck our hands in our pockets and promoted a little bit in media. This was before all the draconian censorship had emerged.
Right.
And it got quite good coverage, came to the attention of certain people in government and so on. And that was the beginning of Panda, Pandemics Data and Analytics. And for the next few months, we attracted many, many members here in South Africa, people who were equally concerned, academics from all walks, epidemiologists and doctors and economists, lawyers, various professionals. Being a private equity guy by day, I've always appreciated the value of having multidisciplinary teams. And we kind of extended that philosophy into Panda. So we didn't take the view that you ask a doctor what you should do in the face of a very complex phenomenon like an epidemic. A doctor is one person you should ask, but you should also ask, sociologists and actuaries, data scientists, economists. This is a complex story. And this was something that was not being done. There was this, trust the experts, and then you turn around and the expert was some shriveled little gnome in the epidemiology department of a university that nobody'd ever heard of. And he was suddenly going to say what the whole of society should do and think through all of the consequences of these enormously complex problems. So follow the science, trust the experts always seemed like a very anti-scientific, pseudo-scientific kind of approach to take. We took the opposite, multidisciplinary, really taking an approach of continued conjecture and criticism. And we evaluated every aspect of the epidemic. And by October of 2020, had concluded that almost everything the media narrative was telling us was a complete lie. The virus was not new. The epidemic was not deadly. Lockdowns didn't work. Masks didn't work. And this whole story of invoking all of these non-pharmaceutical methods to engage with this so-called pandemic were all completely bananas.
Spot on. Yeah. And that is the place at which we come together. I think as I read something from Panda, I thought, this year's convergent evolution, because what I found so startling in March of 2020 was watching the world go insane. Right, I do statistics for a living, been in the capital markets forever, and I was looking at the stats coming out of Italy and stats coming elsewhere, and it seemed to show that this used to be called life. In 1965, actuarially speaking, right, 1965 in America, 99% of the people that caught the Wuhan virus and died of it would not have been alive to have caught it in the first place. So, my argument was coming from an anthropological standpoint and a statistical standpoint, saying, we have created the conditions for such extreme wealth in the United States, at least, that people have become accustomed to believe that anything that is anything other than perfect health forever must be an abnormality that must be attacked. But it recently is 1940 in America. People keep throwing statistics at me, like from New Zealand or Australia. We had 34 deaths per 100,000, or we versus your evil 284 deaths per 100,000 in America, whatever it is. And my point back to them is, well, we had 60,000 deaths per 100,000 or per million among first year borns in America. 60,000, 6% of children born in America in 1940 didn't make it to their first birthday. Yeah. So the great news is we've done such a marvelous job in medicine and public health that people are generally well. People live longer whether they're healthy, or big debate. But mortality rates have certainly declined. Yeah. And then the world lost their minds, so far as I could tell. And then to me, it's been through the looking glass, somewhat Orwellian experience to have been canceled from YouTube and chucked off of LinkedIn for stating very benign statistics from the CDC. And now our own government has created a disinformation governance board, which is just
this is exactly it.
Hilarious.
The biggest culprits in terms of misinformation and disinformation in this whole story have been public health institutions, especially the World Health Organization. I mean, they were the ones who propagated this idea of a novel virus and put pressure on the International Committee of Viral Taxonomy to name the virus something other than its natural name, which would have been SARS, or at most SARS-2.
Right.
Give it a new name so that we can talk about a novel virus.
Yep.
And just try and pretend that this individuum of a cluster of viruses that has probably been circulating amongst the human population since time immemorial is really something to which we are completely naive. And that had a whole lot of knock-on effects, because then these crazy modelers got their hands on that sort of novel virus meme and decided that there was universal susceptibility, that anybody could contract severe disease and die. And they began modeling accordingly, as if this was some kind of, Black Death.
Who was the British nutcase? The same one that caused the English to kill
Ferguson.
1 million cows.
Yeah.
On the basis of his projections that turned out to be untrue. Yeah, Ferguson, who was later sneaking around to see his mistress during the lockdowns because of crucial virus.
He wasn't scared of the virus that he was trying to scare everybody from.
What you've been at this for a while, and you took, as you put it, a very sort of data-driven, objective viewpoint towards it. In your fight for this, because you've been front and center, what have you, like, aside from the normal sort of a rolling snowball downhill just gathers mass, right? Just inevitably when something stupid happens and government puts it in motion, it's almost impossible to stop it in a rational time frame. Do you sense any kind of rational actors who really felt they were going to benefit from this hysteria, or was it just the madness of crowds writ large? In your opinion?
I often talk about the combination of cock-up conspiracy and emergence, those are all three in play at the same time. There clearly was a strong vein in public health where I would say, let's say in private public health, in other words, institutions that are not inside the normal apparatus of public health. So they get together and they have these conferences where they plan on doing a whole lot of things that completely negate long-standing traditions and guidelines in public health for how you handle respiratory virus epidemics and so on. And so there was an element of planning, and the planning was, clearly oriented around favoring certain special interest groups, pharmaceuticals, corporations, tech firms, various people who had an interest in rolling out programs of control and surveillance, the deep state actors in the security and intelligence community. All of these people were quite favorably disposed towards this heavy-handed and draconian kind of approach that seeks to, as Bill Gates keeps on putting it, we have to be able to stop pandemics before they start. This kind of absolutely insane approach to, diseases that are inevitably widespread and probably continually circulating even before you've given them a name.
Right.
So there was that planning element. Then there was the complete cock-up element, which persists of public health people who are terrified and government officials who are terrified, listening to every word they're told by their new taskmasters and not questioning anything, believing everything that they're fed in mainstream media, which is owned by the same corrupt fellows who did all the pandemic planning exercises. And then there's the emergent event, which is, how does society respond? What happens when you shove fear down everybody's throats for 2 years? Well, you get cognitive degeneration. People can't think anymore. They can't think straight. And a whole lot of things happen because of that. So it's a very complex phenomenon. I think it'll take years for us to unpick it all. We do need to take a forensic approach because there clearly was criminal.
The worst thing we can do is let
no
these clowns declare victory. I mean, I've been emphatic about that, right?
Yeah.
Well, it worked. No, hold on, wait, no, no, it didn't.
Yeah,
we living in Florida, it's been fascinating because we are one of 3 states that our governor had a brief moment of succumbing to the hysteria in the first 2 weeks of March of 2020.
Yeah,
and you can't. What's fascinating to me is culturally, you can't convince people not prone to brainwashing of anything, right? So they tried this hysterical crap from DC with Fauci and Burke standing there looking concerned, all this nonsense. Floridians as a whole ignored it from day one. Just ignored it. It was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. When they closed the gyms, and then the best when they tried to close the beaches, because that's a great idea. So for anyone who might get sick, let's shut down wide open spaces full of sunlight and salt. Yeah, that's a breeding ground for close contamination of a virus. Crazy. Everyone ignored it. And whether bowing to reality or just being an objective, data-driven guy, by mid-March, DeSantis is like, all right, this is idiocy. Go about your lives. You should probably wear a mask if you want to, if you really need, but we've just lived our lives. And so when I've gone to other places, like the People's Republic of Vermont or New York, during this insanity, because I had to, it was madness. Absolute madness. Yeah. Walk into a restaurant, like, you have to have a mask on. I said, but I'm going to walk 9 feet, sit down, and take it off. Is the virus just up here? Have you discovered something fascinating that's only above shoulder height? Like, none of it made any sense, and people just bent over for it.
No, I mean, it's really phenomenal. And possibly the biggest struggle through all of this has been for me to take the deep breath and try and retain some sense of respect for my fellow humans, because I kind of get a very strong urge to shake them and say, what on earth are you doing? Can you not see how ridiculous all of this is? And that's not just the person you see in the shopping mall or something like that. I'm talking about some of my closest friends who are long regarded as, supremely rational beings.
Yep.
Well, they were as susceptible as anybody else, donned the mask, went wild with fear, were convinced they were going to die, tested themselves until there was nothing left of the, the nasal terminal
epithelial lining.
Nothing. And just generally went completely hysterical. They were lost. And that's extremely difficult, to see a close friend basically behave like an insipid coward is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And
I came out of New York.
Makes you question yourself, your own judgment. So I've really battled. Sorry,
I didn't mean to interrupt. We're having a slowdown on the transmission rate, but part of what I've grappled with is dealing with a lot of my friends in New York who bought this nonsense. Is, to me, it's like Stockholm syndrome. At this point, you can't believe you let the state ruin your children's lives by keeping them out of school. Like, at this point, if you succumb to this nonsense, you almost have to believe it made sense, because otherwise you're an idiot and a sheeple that succumbed to totalitarian dictates for no reason at all, and they just can't handle believing that.
Yes, I mean, where are the parallels in history for this? I think in terms of the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany, the people who kind of went along with the whole evil apparatus and then had to somehow, recover their egos, their sense of, personal rectitude, even though they had supported something which, with the benefit of hindsight, was dreadful. Yeah, dreadful, immoral, unethical, stupid. Most people in Western society are in that position right now. They're going to have to find some method to resolve the dissonance, some rationalization that takes them away from the horrifying fact that they actually, by going along with the lies, added credence to them, and in the process did a great deal of harm to many, many people, like much greater harm than probably has ever been done or ever in the history of man, in terms of the cumulative loss of life and economic well-being and health. Well-being is a broad term. I can use it as sort of a catch-all. This has probably been the event that is greater than any world war or nuclear event or any disaster has hurt the most people, so they have to somehow either pretend that it never happened. Is there going to be a collective loss of memory? Or they have to kind of explain how they had doubts, or they actually fought against it, or they knew all the time, or something like that. And by the way, I've already watched people perform that flip. That what happens is they become very suggestible. So if you say to them, John, but you knew this all along,
Right. You just had,
and very well that John was terrified, and John was wearing his underpants on his face all day, but thinking that it warded off the dreaded lurgy. But John will immediately jump onto that and say, "Yeah, no, I knew you're right."
Right. And it's what I found very fascinating about it is, look, I can forgive anyone panic, right? They fed you a bunch of fear-mongering nonsense in January to March of 2020. If you're one of the people that panicked and freaked out, I can kind of forgive that.
Yeah.
But by the time we got to September, I'm thinking Northern Hemisphere for schooling, by the time we got to September of 2020, if you were one of the idiots that was still in favor of keeping the schools closed, you are forever a moron in my life, and I don't want to hear a word. Like, there's no excuse. There was no excuse at that point. And as this trundled along, it got dumber and dumber, right? It just made no sense whatsoever. At this point, it is statistically more dangerous for a child under 18 to drive on a highway with their parents in a car than to contract the Wuhan virus. And by the way, I call it that, not out of trying to be some difficult person, because I'm an originalist, and that's what it was first called until the Chinese Communist Party told the American media they didn't want it being called that. It had to be called COVID. And I just do not do what communists tell me to do. So not that I'm a Trump fan, I just don't do that. So to me, it's the Wuhan virus. But in any event, it's more dangerous statistically. There are more children, sadly, that die in car accidents than will die of this damn disease. And so how people are trying to wrap their brains around justifying ruining 2 years. Kids didn't do the things that other people got to do. The boomers got to have their graduations, their end of year sporting events. I mean, we have friends whose child was an Olympic gymnast. Her dream is over. She worked her entire life. And at the time this all started, she was 15. She was preparing to become an Olympic gymnast, and everything stopped, and her training ended, and her dream ended. And that is unforgivable to me, for some boomers who thought maybe they'd live a little longer. It's a disgrace.
Yeah, look, I take an even more extreme view than yours. I don't think the initial panic is forgivable. Let's go back to some old values. Here's one. Real men don't panic.
Right. Well, there's that. But especially in America, we spent 40 years of whiny draft dodgers from Vietnam telling the world that real men cry. So, but go ahead. It's different in South Africa, but we have a different dynamic here.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't that different. I mean, everybody panicked, just about.
Yep.
And that is something, it's fundamentally altered my worldview. I mean, I still retain like a positive regard for humans in general. I've always been fairly egalitarian in my outlook. Philosophically, I accept the what for most people is a rather strange notion of the universality of human mental competence. So I don't go in for these theories of differential innate intelligence and IQ tests and all that stuff. I find them all a little bit suspect, a little bit pseudoscientific. So I start off from a page that regards people as intelligent and is not fooled by the sort of superficial features of a formal education. I work very well with people who've pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps and who are entrepreneurs who maybe don't have the sort of spit and polish that your Ivy League graduates and so on will have. And actually, I prefer working with such people. That's why I'm in private equity in the small end of the private equity market.
Yep.
And so very much, from a sort of a philosophical and personality perspective, I fit into that category of being fairly egalitarian with respect to how people ought to be treated and regarded. And it was therefore very difficult and very painful for me to see how, on the level of character, people overwhelmingly fell short in certain sectors, notably the elite sectors of our societies.
You bet.
Because when I went around the corner to the townships in South Africa, they were having none of it. They weren't wearing masks. They weren't social distancing. They thought it was a load of baloney, and correctly so. But when you went to the high-end shopping centers around the corner, they're all running around with their little, underpants on their head, and their this kind of look of continual terror in the only part of their face that you could see, which was their eyes.
Right.
And to me, this was just so. I really found it so risible, so objectionable, and I couldn't do anything but locate it in like a complete absence of character.
Mm-hmm.
It's made me rethink so much. We have not emphasized the old virtues nearly sufficiently.
Not nearly. One of the most favorite is become a t-shirt and a poster for college dorms, the rest of that old British line from World War II of, keep calm and carry on. And I love engaging, especially students, about that. So what does that mean to you? Like what do you think that slogan, when written, what did it mean? And none of them can tell me what it meant, which was you're supposed to keep living your life knowing that any moment the bomb from the Luftwaffe can wipe it out. Because to do otherwise is to be paralyzed and the economy will stop and we'll lose. And none of them knew that. That's what that fun, popular little mug means, right? Is that we are at some point, this is going to end. You're going to die in a minute, you're going to die in 40 years. But to live your life in fear and paranoia is ridiculous. And there's no point in doing that. And that lesson has been utterly lost in many places, luckily not everywhere. But certainly here, I mean, the fact that so many people just acceded to these rules. You brought up the Soviet Union earlier. What I thought was so great about that is for those people living, New York or Michigan or California, where they really adhered to these rules as long as they could. This was the Soviet Union. It was displayed in California perfectly. Rules for thee, not for me. I'm going to declare that masks are an existential necessity. You're going to die without wearing one, and I'm the governor. And then a week later, someone's going to take a picture of me surrounded by 20 of my closest friends in a shishi restaurant celebrating a birthday without a mask on. And they did this for the entire hysteria and have never been called to account. Someone actually had the wherewithal to start a recall account to recall Governor Newsom in California. And even then, the people of California, suffering under the weight of this stupidity, could not be bothered to recall this fool. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible.
I think it's worthwhile pointing out that all of the complaints that we've been making here about how people failed to show any spine and mettle and weren't calm and didn't carry on, all of those complaints would be valid even if there was a deadly virus, which there wasn't.
Which there wasn't.
Exactly. There was no deadly virus. Yeah. I mean, if and for me, the ultimate kind of evidence, if you like, for that, although we had plenty of it along the way, but over 2 years, Sweden, which didn't lock down and didn't wear masks or do any of this pantomime stuff, had zero excess mortality, roughly, give or take.
Statistically zero.
Statistically zero within. And so when you did more or less nothing, you get zero excess mortality. Now, if there's a broadly circulating deadly virus, that's not going to be the outcome, not even close, right? And so, it's important to realize, okay, the reaction shouldn't have been panic. The reaction shouldn't have been hysteria. The reaction shouldn't have been all this crazy theater. Even if the virus was in fact deadly. It's just, it's wrong, no matter what the epidemiological assumptions are. What we did was wrong. How our societies behaved was deeply wrong and indicative of an incredible and upsetting degree of cowardice and lack of character and just general, societal malaise of some sort, a kind of slide into the abyss. That's what we have been confronted with here.
And how do we confront that? Whenever I have employees or students, I always tell them that there are at least 3 areas in which complete objective acceptance is critical for one to make any change, and that is Buddhism, alcoholism, and finance. Like, somewhat jestingly, right? If you don't accept reality, you're fixing the wrong problem, right? So, but here I'm wondering strongly. It's no longer, to my mind, it was never an argument about objective reality and data-driven results, right? Those of us already believe that, and those of us like my governor Ron DeSantis in Florida and Swedes, they already lived it. They looked at the data and said, "This is ridiculous. Live your life," right? But we've got a massive number of people who both either instigated this insane totalitarian takeover of society that, at least in the West, was completely illegal. There were no justification for any of this. And you had tin pot dictators who were as jealous as petty despots of old. The governor of New Jersey sending the state police to arrest a man reading a book alone on a beach because you're supposed to be at home, right? I mean, just craziness. The misallocation of state resources to arrest someone sitting on a beach. That alone should have made people angry, and yet it didn't. And that I find absolutely fascinating. Unless we can get people to understand the objective reality of what just happened, as you and I understand it, I'm terrified for the future, because some people still believe, well, it was tough, but we got through it together. Oh my God, no, it was tough, and you bent over like an idiot for totalitarian, and thank God it's over is the answer. That's not the same as it's tough and we got through it. And getting people to understand that, I don't know how we do it. Is that part of what Panda is trying to do, is to have that discussion?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about the creation of strong societies and cultures, and the maintenance of community, the sense of agency, the spiritedness. I like to invoke the old Greek tradition of thumos, and talk about the numerous aspects of that kind of culture. And
elaborate on that for my non-Greek speaking listeners.
Sorry?
Elaborate on that for my non-Greek speaking listeners.
Thumos is one of those difficult to translate words. It is probably best captured by, if there's a single word for it, by the notion of spiritedness. It's that idea that you're not going to just keel over or cower away at the first sign of difficulty. It's also associated with positive attributes that, given a situation of stasis, you will be an agent of change. So it captures elements of, in the extreme, hot-headedness, youthfulness, exuberance, energy. And I think that is lacking from our society. There's these notions like safety culture and speech being violent, and these quite strange obsessions with identifying as, and the victimology and all this kind of crap. Those are all manifestations of extreme societal weakness, and they're destructive, deeply destructive, especially when they take control in this very widespread way in the elite classes. I don't think they're visible anywhere amongst the working classes. People there are far too smart to fall for all that malarkey. But when they take over in the elite classes, serious damage can be done, and before you know it, you have quite a lot of perverse things happening, and injurious things, damage and harm in particular being done to children, the people we should protect, not harm. So yeah, I mean, we definitely have a strong strain of it in Panda, this notion of doing what we can to support ideas of human agency and to undermine this concept of creeping centralization and kind of the surveillance state, technocratic, utilitarian approach to running the world from a spreadsheet, as opposed to allowing human beings to get on with it and be generative and creative and, make their own path in the world and take their own risks and live with the consequences. I mean, that's the path to happiness.
Yeah. I'm curious,
There's such a
especially
thing.
a lot of our listeners are American. What would you say would be kind of the specifically interesting dynamics in the South African context of how these 2 years played out? In America, it's very clear. 97% of Democrats will say masks are great, and 3% of Republicans would even admit that putting a piece of T-shirt like our face would do anything, right? So that split's really clear right there. What, if any, were there clearly delineated lines within South African political or social or ethnic kind of society that really rose to the fore, or were there no such obvious delineations?
Well, it's very interesting because obviously the standout feature of South Africa's socio-political history is apartheid, and this terrible system of dividing the population on the basis of their the phenome of skin color, which, as you can judge from my earlier comments, is one that I have zero time for.
Right.
But this infuses our entire past, and there were a number of, if you take a big enough step back, there were a number of humorous outcomes. So yeah, for the last few years in South Africa, most of the last decade, the story has been one of the elite classes struggling against a very corrupt government that had been captured by one particular commercial family, and were sowing the seeds of economic destruction on an immense scale. And so you had this elite class who were completely used to conceiving of the government as being a bunch of lying crooks. But the moment they got the slight amount of fear into their systems from the deadly virus, they suddenly began worshipping every word that exact same government said. And so
that's great.
So, and the elite classes in South Africa are still, disproportionately white people. I mean, there's a big growing black upper class, the black diamonds, as they call them.
Right.
But suddenly that whole elite class was running around like a bunch of, just completely deranged people. But the rest of the society just took one look at this thing and said, nah. And and same with vaccine uptake.
Right.
The same people, they read everything and believe everything. If you tell them, look, those Pfizer phase 3 trials, they were fraudulent. These vaccines don't work as advertised. They're much more dangerous than everybody's representing. There is no high quality evidence, no high quality scientific evidence for their efficacy or their safety. Numerous elements of normal pharmaceutical trials were skipped out. It's a new therapy. You probably shouldn't even call them vaccines. They're a type of gene therapy. They used to even call them that by the very companies that produced them used to call them that before this whole thing was marketed.
Right.
And the thing's being pushed by organizations that are, if you do 1 minute of scratching, you can see that they are funded or owned by the very pharmaceutical companies who are producing these things, or at least associated, in some way or other with the producers. And so it was a real pinch yourself moment to see this, like really very funny if you think about it. This complete inversion of the attitudes of the elite classes towards the government, and overnight inversion, I might add. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing is that I if you think American institutions have been corrupted by the user funds and so on, that pharmaceutical companies pay to the FDA and so on. You want to come to a developing country where government funding of healthcare is pretty stretched. What that creates is an environment where the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation can walk in and pretty much, with almost petty amounts of cash relative to, by American standards, by lock, stock, and barrel every single public health institution and every single medical faculty and every single university.
Right.
They've got them under their thumbs,
Wow.
and they will not move to contradict the narrative. And the academics who are members of Panda are, for the most part, cryptically involved because they would lose their jobs. That's how powerful the stranglehold of the pharmaceutical complex is over public health in many, many developing countries. In fact, it's exceptional to find anything else, where there's at all any pocket of resistance. So those are the two features. We have, so vaccine uptake stalled at like 30% or something like that. People just weren't having any of it. And I'm kind of proud of that, but it means that I kind of find myself associating with, an increasingly less elite group.
Good for you. Well, so to put it into words that some of my listeners may understand, what you just described is the elites in elite, self-described elite class in South Africa would be denizens of the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and everyone else would be Floridians. Excellent. All right, good. That's good. I think that's terrific. That matches my experience of having lived in South Africa for years. So that's very good. That's really funny. Yeah, the degree to which people just hastened to. And we did episodes early on, which I found absolutely hilarious. That because a lot of my early training was in anthropology, and so to me, as he used to say, you might want to cover your ears. No matter in what tone of voice someone said this, all I ever heard was, "I found the science." This grating version of this screechy little nails on a chalkboard voice, usually coming from an enumerate social science, liberal arts major who couldn't define standard deviation for you if they tried, right? But this became their religious mantra of, "I found the science," meant that you're stupid, I'm a Democrat and brilliant, and you should shut up. But then when Rochelle Walensky, who came in with the Biden administration as the new head of the CDC, for her first 2 weeks of the job, she had yet to be handed the propaganda playbook. And so she kind of had the rational view. She was actually following the science in the way one would if one actually looked at objective data. And she came in saying things like, "Why are the hell the schools closed? Children shouldn't be wearing masks. What's this idiocy?" She was quickly beaten into line by the Biden administration, and she stopped telling the truth after about 14 days. But it was classic to watch that, for those 14 first days of the Biden administration, the head of the CDC was actually telling you the truth. Now, why, when offered the chance to either quit or start spewing propaganda, she chose propaganda is a question for the ages, and I don't know her. So presumably maybe she thought on balance, as many people do, well, maybe I could do more. Maybe I can actually do some good here. Who knows what people's rationalizations are, right? As you pointed out earlier. But she came in speaking truth, and that quickly evaporated and began to hew to the party line. When the mask mandate on airplanes was lifted here, right? It went on for months longer than any single doctor suggested it should. And the airline executives went before Congress. They're like, the HEPA filtration in our planes is better than a hospital surgical theater. Like, what are you, nuts? Like, it screens viruses. You are safer in an airplane than you are in the terminal before you get on the airplane. Despite all that, they love this kabuki theater and this visceral control over people's faces. And if you flew, it was, again, like the Soviet Union. The law was this, but the enforcement was capricious. If you had a crew on the, stewardess crew or steward crew that didn't care, you took your mask off for the food service, they didn't say anything about it after that. If you had a lunatic who'd bought the Kool-Aid or just liked being a petty dictator, they would march up and down screeching at people, "Put your mask on, over your nose." It was nuts. And so you went into every air flight you had to take with this kind of anti-lottery. Is this going to be a vaguely pleasant flight to get me from A to Z? Or is this going to be one more fascist confrontation that if I get angry enough, I'm going to be videotaped being hauled off by the Transportation Security Administration? It was nuts. And if you saw the videos when they declared it, mid-flight for many people, the judge overturned it. And when the stewards announced it to the plane, I haven't heard such effusions of joy in years. Like, yay! Like they're taking their masks off and throwing them. So, did that same sort of kind of absolute control prevail in South Africa, or was it really just there was no point in trying to control millions of people who were like, this is stupid, I refuse to
Oh
listen.
no, as I was saying, only in the elite settings,
That's
of
it.
which airplanes are one.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, if you went to a restaurant in the leafy suburbia, there was a good chance that somebody would ask you to put a mask on as you did the 9-foot walk.
Right.
I always just said, forget it,
Right.
I'm not doing it. Yeah, I'm happy to go elsewhere. And I was never asked to leave, but I was given some stern words. I had stern words back.
Right.
You learn lots of lines. My colleague Peter Castleton has a great one. He was the actuary who did most of the work in that quantifying years of life lost to lockdown paper that I mentioned at the beginning.
Right.
He tells people, he flashes straight back to people, and I've got the IQ exemption. And they say, what's that?
Really good.
If you've got an IQ above 85, you don't have to wear a mask. And that confuses people, and he just walks on past.
That's an excellent answer. I'm sorry, I'm too smart for this idiocy. That's great. Oh, it's huge. Well, in general, I mean, there's a lot here. Do you have now that you took the time and the effort, your colleagues came together, you built this data-driven analytics platform around pandemics. Do you have a much broader vision for what it can do now that we're putting Wuhan in the rearview mirror? Is this sort of a, basing itself as a more proactive public policy think tank kind of thing, or what's the vision?
Yeah, no, so we've launched a project looking at the broader political, economic, social, technological, legal, ethical aspects of the whole emergence of this event. So doing the forensic work, because everybody can point to the organizations which were important. Michael Singer's book on what's it called, snake oil, the story of the CCP's influence. You can look at Robert Kennedy's book, The Real Anthony Fauci, and you can read there the influence of the pharmaceutical industry, the FDA, the pandemic planning exercises. And so you go. So we can name the WEF, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Health Organization, the Council for Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. These are all the Bank of International Settlements, the World Bank, the IMF. These are all organizations which were in on the hoax, okay? And everybody can do that. We can all see that stuff. It's written all over the place. But how exactly did this all work? And how was the lockstep administered? Where do we find the points of leverage to undo the whole charade? How do we bring this thing down? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? This is the kind of work that it is not good enough to simply list the actors and to talk in broad terms of what they've done. So we are taking the same multidisciplinary, research-based approach, fact-based approach, reality-based approach to understanding all of that. And I believe the organization will be busy at it for the rest of our lives, because it's that complex a phenomenon, and there are so many rich veins of exploration to explain this craziness. I mean, I'll give you one right now. You've been sitting there talking about the Wuhan virus. I object to that term, but for reasons entirely different from what most people would. I'm not worried about whether the citizens of Wuhan are offended by it.
Any more than people of Lyme, Connecticut get upset when someone gets bitten by a tick.
I think the whole idea of viral pandemics is one that has to be interrogated. I mean, we have co-evolved. When I say we, I mean all animals, all mammals. Even mammals is too narrow a category. We've co-evolved with viruses since the dawn of time in a very complex ecology, in a world where every conceivable ecological niche is explored. And it's inconceivable to me that you will have these viruses springing up ab novo in zoonotic events from a bat or a pangolin or a sneezing cat or whatever. This whole idea needs to be.
Name. I love pangolins.
Yeah, poor pangolin. There's so few of them. No. But this idea of these entirely new viruses emerging
Mm.
is absurd. On the face of it, you need to take a more holistic ecological view and say, actually, our bodies, the bodies of healthy people, are well equipped to deal with a huge range of viruses. They can't spring up new. They must evolve from something. And what they evolve from is in all likelihood something that the human body and its ancestors were exposed to through the eons. And we have mechanisms for dealing with them. So this whole pandemic preparedness narrative needs to be challenged and pushed back upon, because it has real society destroying components to it. And Bill Gates and his whole, we've got to get ready for the next one and make sure that the pandemic doesn't even start. We're going to stop it. We're going to burn it out. We're going to, right. That's all just intellectually derisory stuff. And we need to call it out and stop the policy trajectory from taking the shape that it has.
That's interesting. And I like the idea of the work. To me, it's kind of like acupuncture or jujitsu, and like finding the points of change that matter, right? Because when you list out most of the institutions that kind of went along for the ride, I would bet most people, most organizations, one by one, right? What was that great line of, evil happens when good men or women, fail to do anything? Like if I'm sitting there with my job in the World Bank in Washington, and I'm told that I can go home and work from home and play with my cats and I have to shower every day because there's this pandemic on, I'm like, okay. Right? There was no decision point of everyone standing up in their cubicles and saying, let's suppress the masses, right? Okay, let's do that. Right? For predominantly, a couple of people had some strong views about what should be done. Everyone else fell along in line and went along with it. And what I found most offensive was, whenever someone I knew who either didn't have to work to continue to feed their families, or could do it sitting at home with in front of a computer, whenever one of them championed universal lockdown, they said, are you signing over your paycheck to Jimmy who drives a truck? Like there are people that need to go to work to earn a living. And for you to tell them that you're deciding they can't make the decision as to whether or not they can stay home or not, the absurdity of the logic of this came to a head, at least for me, with a person I know I've known for years, professionally, respect the hell out of her, really, really smart professional, right? Managed to tell me in one of the most bizarre interactions I've ever had that the Canadian truckers, who are having the protest in Canada, where the lunatic prime minister decided to declare an emergency to deal with them. She told me not only are they not Canadians and not truckers, they're actors paid for by Steve Bannon in America. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. Whenever someone tells me conspiracy theory, I go right back to G. Gordon Liddy of Watergate, whose great line was, 2 people can keep a secret if one of them is dead. So the idea that like hundreds of American actors are going to pretend to be diverse Canadians who drive trucks and bring along women and children to act as their families, and all of this is paid for by the right wing in America. One of the craziest things anyone's ever said to me, rather than working class people who literally drive alone in a truck with no one, don't want a vaccine. To her, the insane conspiracy story, which is nuts, made more sense than truckers who are fed up being told what to do by an idiot prime minister who wore blackface throughout college and wants everyone to do what he tells them to do instead of what he does. The fact that sort of thing speaks to what you're talking about, like people you've known and respected your whole life, your brain just explodes. Like, how did I have that discussion and come away from it like, what? Craziness. So how do we fix that? How do we change that?
Well, the awareness that we have to create is that the big problems of the world have nothing to do with pandemics or climate change or your particular crazy theory about how many genders there are or anything like that.
72 and counting.
Yeah, your ability to identify as whatever, those are not the problems of the world. The real problem in the world is centralization. This is the thing that has the most potential to destroy creativity, knowledge generation, progress, problem solving, and thereby reductions in poverty and improvements in greening or any positive attribute you care to mention. Centralization throughout history has produced only stasis, violence, oppression. That's what we've got on our hands. When the World Health Organization talks about One Health, when we talk about universal vaccine passports, when we talk about programmable central bank digital currencies and universal digital IDs, these are all measures designed to centralize control, and they're pernicious. And we need to start working to develop the societal wherewithal to contain and manage and push back against a whole host of these measures. Failure to do so would lead to one of the largest, to I fear, a humanitarian crisis that makes even the COVID policy response look small.
Absolutely. There's this great show out of Britain called Black Mirror, which they had a couple of dystopian episodes about technology run amok, right? And one of them years ago was about this, social credit policy. Every little interaction you have, if I buy a coffee from you, you click, smile or not, and I earn up social credits and I can get benefits. And then the Chinese actually did that in real life, right? Like if you are deemed to be not a nice person, well, all of a sudden you're not allowed to buy a ticket on a train to go from Shenzhen to Beijing. Like you're not allowed to do things. And then to hear, Comrade Warren Wilhelm Jr., who for a while people knew as Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York, he actually said, well, New York is full of great stuff. And if you get vaccinated, you have the right to participate in that great stuff.
Yeah.
Prejudice, right? No scientific background for that. No, never mind if you already had the disease and you were already immune, like none of it. And they love this idea. They set up these little passports on your phone and all this crap. And they were plunging headfirst towards it. One of the things I can, in a time of great despair, I can be happy about is more and more people have gotten logical, shaking their head free of this crap. Right? You don't have to land anywhere in Europe anymore and show them that you've had a vaccination or any of that stuff. And I think people are getting rational because they saw how terrifying this was. But central bank digital currencies, same exact thing. There have been plenty of people in America that have been pushing for a cashless society for years. And the greatest part is they can't even control themselves from admitting that it's about control. This guy Ken Rogoff, who wrote about this repeatedly on behalf of Democrat administrations. Well, we need to know what people are spending their money on. Do we, Ken? Why? Who's the we and why? Am I not allowed to buy a copy of the Cato Institute's last journal? If I do that, you're going to come have an instruction session with me about how centralizing control is better than freedom. It's really kind of terrifying, but at least they've tipped their hand and we can call them out on it.
Yeah, and I think there's a kind of a theme running through everything that they say, and the theme is one of incredible hubris. There is no humility in the face of complexity, whether they are dealing with an epidemic or your immune system or the global climate or the economy. There is this very hubristic notion that we can control all of these things. In the case of the economy, with interest rates and quantitative easing, we can manage economic growth and do things to boost economic growth. I mean, a far more prosaic and I think sensible read of economics centers on the concepts of knowledge creation, and therefore diversity and freedom, because without the ability to conduct on the margins multiple conjectures about what might improve things, and then have those conjectures tested in an environment rich in criticism and freedom of speech, that you can take on any idea that's presented to you. In the absence of that, you have no knowledge creation and therefore no economic growth. So economic growth is about knowledge creation, not about your interest rate policy or how you manage your fiat currency or inflation control or anything like that. They're emphasizing all the wrong things because those are the things that they can control. So it's like the old proverb of the guy walks by on the sidewalk and he sees this drunk fellow under the streetlight going around in circles, and he says, "What are you doing?" "No, I'm looking for my keys." "But why do you keep looking for them there?" "Because this is where the light is,
Where the light is, exactly.
And it's the same. Why do these vaccinologists all go around emphasizing antibodies when we all know very well that the immune system is far more complex than antibodies? Oh, it's because that's where the light is. That's what they can measure. That's what they sort of have this very narrow view of. Same with the climate story. Let's reduce the whole climate to one little molecule, CO2, and how it's measured. And if we twiddle that button, then we'll be able to manage the climate to a glorious future. And so for me, these things all suffer from the same problem, which is this vainglorious. It's actually you require a stupid person to believe this, because it's a failure to appreciate complexity and the richness of human and indeed biological experience. You require a specific type of stupid to repeatedly fall for these ideas that you can control all of this. And so Mr. Rogoff, yes, his illusion is that by being able to control what other stupid human beings spend their money on, we can improve the world.
To me, I've always been referring to this approach to governance, which you put very eloquently, as kind of late night first year university student dorm room bull session, right? 3 a.m, everyone's tired. They're all hopped up on caffeine and great ideas, and they've solved the problems of the world. Now they're going to go out and tell everyone what to do. It's kind of like that. It's just that simplistic. It's just that stupid. Well, if everyone just did this, but they're not going to do that. So how about we approach things, as you say, with a bit of humility and given complexity? One of the best things I've ever been through, which is kind of a staple in kind of business school classes or others, is to demonstrate to people just how pointless it is to try to claim you could ever dictate outcomes, is they go through that exercise of, here are the current conditions, like say, even for something as simple as, production of glasses at a glass factory, right? Here are the current demand and cost of glasses. You have to now set production for next week, right?
That's right.
And it's great to watch everyone realize how completely random it is and that you're never right. And so the best thing to do is let, free people and free markets decide what they want to do. And that's how the algorithm is going to work.
Well, I mean, even business schools are guilty of sustaining this idea of being able to manage complexity in this kind of utilitarian way. When they teach that great companies are built on, a single person's vision, the monomaniacal pursuit of a big, hairy, audacious goal, that's not how it works. Amazon, for example, is a great example. It's this. There was this idea that they would do bricks and mortarless shopping, and of course that failed. It didn't go anywhere. They spent a great deal of shareholder money producing this online store, but they ultimately made their money from a government contract in cloud. Sorry, the term's evading me right now, but
cloud storage,
web services. And so it goes. As a private equity person, I sit on boards of companies all the time, and I repeatedly say to people, no, we're not here to come up with one grand overarching strategy. We want 10 strategies. We're going to try them all and be ready to kill them as soon as we work out that the real world is sending us a punch on the nose to tell us that our idea was terrible. And so it's a much more. It's not about failing to be brave and failing to try stuff. It's about being humble enough to realize that your bright idea on day 3 of the strategy workshop might actually be a terrible idea for reasons.
Oh, yeah. Well, having been in private equity in BC for years, that great statistics we all know, that 80% of companies that survive to year 4, right, has fundamentally changed the business model on which they got their first funding.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, you get into the market, you learn. You know, I tell younger kids constantly that, you alluded to it, Mike Tyson's great line, the boxer, that everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? Like,
Yes.
how do you react to that market? How do you take what the market's telling you? And there's a delicate line, right? We're living it right now with a rare earth mine I'm involved in, right? There's a delicate line between persevering in the face of adversity to get to a goal that you know is right, versus the market's telling you no. And that's a constant balancing act, because the world is the business writing hagiography is full of the guys at Google took 342 VC meetings before they finally got the dollar from Benchmark, and now they're Google, right? That's a very simplistic telling. So, but there's also the point of, if you're all fully funded graduate students whose lives are paid for, you've got a funny, smart idea, and you live in Silicon Valley, it doesn't cost you that much on the margin to go have another VC meeting if they'll take it, right? So that story in and of itself doesn't tell you much, except about the culture of Silicon Valley and the fact that I'm a grad student with a lot of time on my hands. I could go to a lot of pitches. Whereas if you're a entrepreneur with a family to feed and a rent to pay, you got a much shorter runway, and you better get a result really damn quickly, right? There are externalities that impact there. And that,
I'm never there are few things that amuse me more than looking back on a successful business venture. My partner and I seem to be forever saying to each other, you know, have you got any recollection of how he actually got that right?
Exactly.
And I think it's really important, you know, once you appreciate the complexity of the environments and so on, you're much more likely to have that attitude towards your own history. Whereas I think a lot of people who don't have that, if they get lucky, that they end up telling themselves just so stories.
Oh yeah.
Oh, you know, what we realized was this, and
you
know, but you know, any amount of scratching or scrutiny would reveal that actually they didn't realize this or that. There was hard work along the way. There was resourcefulness. You were reacting and responding to your environment and thinking along the way, maybe, or maybe you were lucky, but you didn't have some plan at time zero that you then inexorably implemented that led to this rich outcome. You know, it's not
funny. What I've done to counter that with my teams is I insist on really detailed meeting notes, because mainly for hindsight and humility, because some wins, some losses, but like I always like to make sure here's the background of the meeting, here's who was here, here's what we discussed, here's a decision, here's what we predict is going to happen.
Yeah.
And that has proven to be more valuable than any other practice that I've ever implemented, because it lays it down objectively. You can't rewrite history if it's written down, right? And like, yes, that is what we said. And sometimes it was absolutely right, and sometimes totally wrong. Sometimes it was right, but the regulators derailed it. Like this, but at least you have some kind of learning as to why X turned out the way it is. But anyway, now we can go on for quite a while. You're absolutely right. But in terms of, I love what you guys are doing at Panda. I love it. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
Happy to be involved any way I can. I mean, I get involved with the Brownstone Institute for the same reason. And, you know, when the Great Barrington Declaration came out, I certainly signed it the moment I read it, right? So I think, again, I should have made a note of it. I think I was among the first 10,000 signatories. I wish I'd been among the first 10, but I wasn't aware of it. But anything that increases people's ability to actually live an independent life free from centralizing coercion has my vote any day of the week. What are your final thoughts for folks on the topic of Panda? Can they be involved, etc.?
Well, from all I can say is from your lips to God's ears. I mean, that we need more people with that attitude. Yeah, people can visit our website, www.pandata.org. We're a volunteer organization, a not-for-profit organization, as well governed as an NPO can be. And we rely upon donations to continue our work, especially the projects that I mentioned earlier, that we are going to fund those and staff those properly with full-time employed academics from of a more independently minded sort than the people who've been parading out all of this nonsense.
So I assume Bill and Melinda Gates are financing big chunks of this.
Yeah, of course, yes, they love it.
First in line. Sorry, go ahead.
I won't be knocking on their doors. Yeah, no. So I mean, we're largely crowdfunded, so we really do appreciate it. The most valuable thing for us is somebody who makes a small, recurring annuity commitment, because that's the nature of the outflow. And none of the directors or executive committee members take any cash from the business at all. We're all volunteers. I've only ever put cash into Panda. So it's well governed, and you get bang for your buck in terms of the money flowing to the actual projects.
And those projects are staffed by researchers who need money for time to do work, to get data.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and people from many disciplines, top-notch people. So yeah, I encourage people to go and look at the history. Over the last 2 years, Panda's done a huge number of articles, and we've been in the business of really popular science, taking a cold, dispassionate look at the scientific literature, and then turning that into explanations for the intelligent layman. And we have quite a broad perspective of what the intelligent layman is. So that's what we've done. And anybody who goes and spends some time on our website will see that we've done it for a while, and we've done it well, and that our organization is a cause worth supporting.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And Nick, again, appreciate you coming on the show. As we tell everyone, we sign off every time, turn off the mainstream media. They're lying to you at best.
Absolutely.
Whether they intend to or not, without even giving attribution. And tune into Messy Times. So thank
you for having me on, Chris.
Appreciate it.